Hi, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Chicagoan Focus programming. My name is Jane Ruby, and I am president of the League of Women Voters of Chicago. Just a little bit about the League of Women Voters before we get into tonight's programming. The League of Women Voters of Chicago is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy and education. LWV Chicago continues to pursue these goals through a range of voter service activities, including voter registration drives, disseminating information for voters, participating in poll watching, and hosting candidate debates and forums, through education of its members and the public to lobbying the government on selected issues, and also through observation of the functioning of governmental bodies to monitor their accountability and transparency. In the past few years, LW Chicago has also worked on some inspiring projects, including the passing of legislation turning Cook County Jail into a polling site. Our democracy remains a work in progress. Even if it takes another century, the League will see it through. And I will pass it over to Kate, who will introduce legal aid.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting us to be with you all tonight. My name is Kate Schenk. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of Legal Aid Chicago. So just a few words about us. We are the largest provider of free civil legal services to people living in poverty in the Midwest. We do not charge for our services. We represent all low-income and otherwise vulnerable people. So we have a staff of about 220, most of which are attorneys. Our staff are primarily full-time. We work to resolve critical legal problems that keep people trapped in poverty. So what we do is we prevent unfair evictions from only decent housing that our clients can afford. We help protect survivors of sexual assault or human trafficking and domestic violence. We help to secure or to preserve really desperately needed benefits like veterans benefits, Social Security, food stamps, and other health benefits. We help senior citizens who've been, swindled by consumer scams or who have been robbed of their livelihoods through fraudulent consumer scams. We help kids get the education that they need to succeed. So that's just a snapshot of what we do. There's so many other legal areas that we cover. We are able to serve around 20,000 people each year, and we do that through the support of individual donors, law firms and companies, and foundations and government grants. I'm joined here today, and the real stars of our show for tonight are Kulsum Ameji, who's a senior attorney and one of the primary authors of our community legal needs assessment that she and Bertini, who is an associate director in our pro bono community partnerships group, the two of them are going to talk about this community legal needs assessment. And just to say, our lawyers and the services that we provide, right, they are really informed by community needs, both inputs that we get on a regular basis, as well as this enormous resource that was really marshaled by Kulsum and informed by the work of Barbara and her group. So I'll turn it over to, I think, the two of you to take it from here.
Thank you, Kate, very much for that introduction. My name is Kate Kulsum, and I'm a senior attorney with Legal Aid Chicago, and I'm the co-author of our first ever community legal needs assessment. For the folks who are with us this evening, thank you. We're competing with a sweltering, sunny summer Chicago evening, and so I'm particularly appreciative of everyone who's able to join us. It's a mark of your commitment to the communities we serve, and in fact, one of the biggest takeaways of this project is just how much our collective work matters and how meaningful it is for the people who need it, particularly during and since the pandemic. And that's whether it is the zealous and passionate volunteers who comprise the League of Women Voters, or whether it's folks from the eclectic mix of organizations who are present in the audience today. All of our work is incredibly impactful and has great import and significance for the area that we serve. Next slide, please. So a little bit about how we're going to spend our time together this evening. I want to speak very briefly about our research methods and then talk a bit about our key findings in terms of critical changes spatially and demographically in our region, some of the underserved populations whom we identified, and also some of the legal and social needs that we heard about that are present, and really warrant some creative and resourceful responses. My colleague Barbara will speak a bit about our organization, Legal Aid Chicago, and Civil Legal Aid, because the great news is that even though we've heard about and we'll be sharing a little bit of the litany of needs in our area, we're already doing a lot of that work. It's really, really wonderful to know that a lot of our work is spot on in terms of what people have identified as being helpful to them. And Barbara will be able to share more about that information later in the presentation. And finally, I'd like to share some ideas and potential action steps that were generated by community stakeholders. And it's kind of a dense slide, so I'm going to ask is for folks to take a photo with their camera and really kind of use that opportunity to reflect later on the various ideas and think about where there might be points of connection for you or for your organization. Next slide, please. So this project was a mandate from our largest federal funder, the Legal Services Corporation. But more deeply, it was an opportunity to pause, listen, and learn from community members and colleagues across various fields. And our purpose was really a very deep purpose to better understand unmet civil legal needs in Cook County. And we took this very seriously. We heard about a project in another place where they just handed out little sheets of paper and people circled either a smiley face or a frowny face. And that was their needs assessment. And that's not ours. Ours was long and dense and deep. And it's indicative of our organization's commitment to the variety of communities present in our region and our deep desire to listen meaningfully and purposefully and to shape work that's responsive to what people are articulating as important to them. Next slide, please. I want to share a quote that I find very meaningful to kind of root us in the why of our work, why we do this work and why this work matters. And this is a quote from Dr. King, and it says that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And this image above this is actually a woven fabric quilt, and it's from quilters in Gee's Bend, Alabama. And I find this to be an incredibly meaningful visual image because it's emblematic of the work that we do in legal aid and the work that all of us do for the collective empowerment of our residents in Cook County. And it's really indicative of the ways in which legal needs and social needs are interwoven and the ways in which various communities are connected in really powerful and provocative and thoughtful ways. And those of us who do this work of serving people, that our creativity and resourcefulness is emblematic as well. And so this slide really encapsulates to me a lot of what we heard in this needs assessment, which is that folks experience problems and needs in the broader rubric, like these concentric circles of legal needs, social needs, financial needs, and all of those pieces are interwoven. And so our solutions also need to be purposeful and layered and interwoven as we move forward in response. And I also want to point out that these quilts were often discarded as just practical, utilitarian, everyday items. And then they one day just were determined to be works of high art. And I think that's really a beautiful symbol of the communities whom we serve, who are often discarded because their resources are perhaps considered raw, and that it really takes a shift in perspective in order to see the power, the grace, and the potential of the people whom we serve through our work. Next slide, please. So, rooting low income communities, centering them at the core of our work. Civil legal aid is a really, as Kate said, it's Kate and I both dedicated our careers to this work. It's an incredibly meaningful intervention, and it's sorely needed nationally and locally. And in fact, there was a national study by the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago that found that 1 in 2 people are turned away when they seek assistance for legal aid. And there's a professor, Professor Rebecca Sandifer, who won her MacArthur Genius Award for her research about civil legal aid. And she found that people often don't even identify their problems as being legal in nature. They just experience them as problems. And so they're often unsure where to turn for support, how to identify and access legal resources. And when they are able to, they often experience grave obstacles in terms of affordability, the lack of resources. And so civil legal aid is only one stakeholder in a broader penumbra of a community of stakeholders, all of whom are serving low income communities. So on the legal side of things, we also have other folks who do legal aid, other folks who are legal providers. We have the private bar, we have the judicial system, we have law schools, and thinking more expansively and broadly about various entities who serve low income communities. We also have government entities, community based organizations, funders, service providers, and health workers. What we share is that we're all part of this woven net of a social safety that we weave together, I would say, a net of safety and around social and legal issues. But I think it's very important to identify that we need to work together in creative and collaborative ways because none of us, no one entity and no one organization can solve these problems by their own. The solutions necessarily will come from most effective solutions will come from creative collaboration across stakeholders and really necessitate, I think, a collective sharing of resources across a wide variety of entities. Next slide, please. So, what were we trying to better understand? What were our probing research questions? We were trying to better know who is low income in our area. Our mission is really to serve folks who do not have access to paid legal help. And so, understanding poverty in our region is a critical component of that. Where do those folks live? What issues do community stakeholders prioritize? And what trends, shifts, and key issues are impacting our client communities? Looking internally and being reflective, whom are we serving and not serving currently? What might we continue and or change about our own work? How can we collaborate and coordinate to enhance impact? And what are community stakeholders' recommendations for our work? Next slide, please. So this project was a labor of love, and I am not a PhD, and neither was my AmeriCorps Vista colleague with whom I work closely on this. And so we're using creativity and our array of contacts and just a lot of hard work and strong efforts to try and answer these questions and to expand and broaden our knowledge. And so some of the resources we utilized were public databases like the census and the ACS, academic literature, and also some analysis of our internal data, such as our phone system and our case management system. I'll talk a bit about some of our other modes of inquiry, but I'm very proud to present on the right-hand side a map of our survey respondents, which we were very successful in obtaining results from the entirety, pretty much, of Cook County, which was really quite an accomplishment, I think, with the resources that we had available. Next slide, please. So how did we go about listening to community? What were our research collection methods? And an important point here is that the majority of our research occurred during the pandemic. So there were very real, tangible constraints to our ability to interface with communities in the ways that we normally do and that are very important to our organization. So we weren't able to be physically out and present because of the lockdown. Nonetheless, we were able to garner over 500 vantage points, and we sort of were thinking about folks who work with the communities whom we serve or folks who are eligible for our services as proxies. And so we really were able to tap into a wide array of perspectives, including aldermen, social service providers, community-based organizations, community health workers, really a very, very extensive array of people. And we also consulted with more than 20 researchers who are experts in poverty and community health, in housing, community development, planning. There were many, many, many different fields whom we interfaced with, whose work shapes our work in civil legal aid. We also were able to meet with 40 plus participants across 4 listening sessions. This included focus groups in Inglewood and back of the yards, as well as with immigrant seniors in Rogers Parks. We talked specifically with moms families that experienced gun violence and incarceration. And we also talked with a group of domestic violence advocates. We received more than 350 survey responses from 195 entities, which is very proud of that accomplishment because it's rare to receive such a high number of survey responses. And really from a very, very varied array of institutions and entities, from judges, from court staff, from just anybody you can think of. We also interviewed 86 key informants, and these were sort of deep conversations that were an hour long where we were asking questions and trying to understand what were people identifying as the needs that their clients or the communities were experiencing. And that also included many conversations internally with our colleagues across practice groups. We also reviewed many other needs assessments to try and come up with a methodology that worked for our circumstances and our constraints. Next slide, please. So I think a really important point I'd like to share is that we just have a very brief period of time together. And so I think the best way of interfacing with the report is really to just carve out some time to look it over, to review the maps, to look at the census information, to read the suggestions for providers. If you have very little time, then please at least peruse the executive summary. And you can also just do Control F and search by subject matter area. I saw that, for example, a lot of people who had signed up for this discussion were interested in reentry issues. And so you can also just search the section for returning citizens. And so I really encourage everyone to take time to look at the report itself, because there really is just a wealth of detailed information in there that's practically applicable to our work. Next slide, please. So thinking about poverty in Cook County and who is eligible for our work and what are some of the key spatial and demographic trends that have shifted in our area over time. Legal aid is born of the civil rights movement and the Office of Economic Opportunity, the LBJ's War on Poverty, and the kind of operating conceptual schema of that time of um, suburban affluence and urban poverty, and of sort of a metropolitan area that is exclusively Black and white is an outdated conceptual schema. Things have shifted considerably in our area in terms of cultural communities, in terms of geographic shifts. And so understanding that really gives us the tools and the ability to shape services in response to the current reality, rather than perhaps like a slightly outdated conceptual sense of what our region looks like and where poverty is located. Next slide, please. So there's a huge justice gap nationally, which I referenced before, and there's also a huge justice gap in Cook County. So in Cook County, 1.2 million people are eligible for civil legal aid, an astonishing number of people in light of the current funded resources available. And more women live in poverty than men. 30% of Black residents live in poverty, and markedly 11% in extreme poverty. 20% of Latinos live in poverty, and 15% of Asians. 19% of youth, and this is one of the biggest sort of epiphantic moments for me from this process, was that nearly 1 in 3 people with disabilities live in poverty. I mean, that's just an astonishing intersection and something to really reflect on as we think about tailoring services and reaching folks who might be underserved. Next slide, please. So I'm really happy to share that we did a lot of mapping for this project and really thinking carefully about geography and sort of the spatial distribution of various demographic characteristics. And I'm happy to report that legal aid is serving a lot of folks who are the people most eligible for our services. And so when we did our mapping of our internal client data and where poverty is, we found that we are indeed serving the zip codes where the need is very great and very deep. And we were also able to identify a couple of areas that are underserved, and opportunity for us to be deliberative in the future about our efforts to reach underserved folks in the south suburbs, the west suburbs, and the southeast side. But I'm very happy to report that we are serving folks where the need is great. And next slide, please. So what are some of the significant trends and shifts impacting our area? One is just the net out migration of low-income people from Cook County, generally, just a loss of low-income population. And another really important shift is the out migration of African Americans. So the Chicago metropolitan area, like many great migration receiving cities, is now in the throes of a kind of after many decades of failed public policies of a reverse migration, in a sense, of people leaving traditional historically African American neighborhoods in our city. And so, what role can all of us play collectively in sustaining flourishing communities and helping people to stay in our metropolitan area? Another key change is just the growth and dispersal of Latino communities, that people are very distributed throughout the suburban region. And there are now a number of suburban areas that are majority Latino. And that's a marked shift from a few years ago. There's a growing Asian community. The percentage of Asians has grown significantly over the last few years. And there are also shifting LEP populations. So we have language groups present today that we didn't have perhaps even 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that affords an opportunity to reach people who are particularly marginalized and vulnerable. And there's also just a national shift of growing aging communities. And there's a burgeoning silver population of people who are highly in need of services. There's a big macro trend deeply impacting many metropolitan regions, including our own, which is the suburbanization of poverty. I think this is a very important one for all of us to be reflecting on and thinking about because, as we heard from many people whom we interviewed, the infrastructure is so minimal in many suburban areas, both in terms of legal services and social services, and also just many deep structural obstacles to building community and receiving support, such as transportation, such as distance, such as a lack of jobs, educational opportunities. So, as we're thinking about the future of poverty in our area and sort of tailoring services and where services are present and not present, this piece I think is an absolutely instrumental piece of long-term thinking of where are the suburban areas in need and what presence is there currently and what presence might be created in the future. Next slide, please. So we also asked questions about populations and issues. And while this was not a hierarchical academic study, it was a very rare opportunity just to listen deeply. And we did hear some key themes that I think are really important to share outwards. Next slide, please. So when we asked survey respondents to identify common issues that they were seeing, I mean, just housing across the board by 298 people was identified as a crucial crisis in their communities. And some of the other issues identified were employment, family and children, immigration, domestic violence, healthcare, disability services, financial issues, older adults, returning citizens, education, consumer issues, LGBTQ population, and veterans. Next slide, please. And when we asked an open-ended question of which populations do you believe are underserved for their civil legal issues, immigrants was a theme that came up across the board in survey responses and questions and interviews. In every mode of inquiry, people identified as immigrants as being underserved. And it's important to note that this is before the more recent shifts demographically in our area. This precedes that. And so I think it's indicative of a deeply unmet need in terms of a population that's underserved. People with mental and behavior disabilities, we heard a lot about disability across the board. It was repeatedly identified as a population where resources are very limited, and that lack of resources shifts their ability to access legal help, and the importance of legal help that's not just about disability, but is across the array of civil legal issues that people experience, and the ways in which it's important for organizations to develop competency to work effectively with people with disabilities. We heard also a lot about limited English proficiency and language access and how those present very tangible obstacles to receiving assistance and for people even understanding or knowing what resources exist. I spoke previously about seniors and young people meetings and people who are fathers. This theme of parenthood came up repeatedly. And I think it's something really worth pondering and thinking about. How are we constructing services and who is receiving support around issues and who might be in deeper need. Next slide, please. So talking in a little bit more depth about a couple of the top issues that we heard about. We're just going to do like a brief dive, but please do read the sections of the report that go into more detail. But I'm just going to talk very briefly about some of these issues. Next slide. So housing issues are monumental. I mean, this was unequivocally the top issue that we heard about. And before people even began talking about like specific legal issues, they felt so strongly that the broader structural matrix shaping housing is an incredible impediment to many different aspects of people's lives. And so we heard a lot about just the sheer lack of affordability in our region and the lack of affordability of housing that's in good condition. So just like a lack of access and the ways in which that, for example, a focus group in Inglewood, people were sharing about how they felt that property was more expensive and in poorer condition in their neighborhood than it might be in a more affluent neighborhood. This theme around displacement, that someone who works near the 606 was saying that folks in our community would like to avail themselves of increases in property values, for example, but feel that they're not able to stay in communities where they have deep relationships because of these broader forces around affordability. And it really varies geographically, like the contours of the issue shift. And so in the south suburbs, for example, we heard about real estate investment trusts purchasing large apartment buildings. In the north suburbs, we heard about all cash buyers pricing out people who had lived in previously affordable houses. Vacant lots, we heard from, for example, an aldermanic office on the west side about this trajectory of property where you have a property that's a family owned property. Perhaps it needs repairs and there's a cycle of building violations. There's a lack of ability to pay for those repairs. That property gets deemed need to be demolished, it becomes abandoned, and eventually it becomes a vacant lot. And so people expressed a lot of concerns about vacant lots as being a blight on the streetscape and also raising issues of safety. Homelessness, in many ways, is a logical consequence of this broader matrix of just inaffordability and lack of access. It's sort of a logical continuum where if people are priced out, there just isn't a place for folks to stay at some point. So we heard a lot about couch surfing and doubling up, just the complex ways in which those issues of lack of housing can intersect with, for example, mental health and substance abuse. Next slide, please. So, in the words of one advocate, housing is the crisis. So, someone said people are basically begging us to put in a legal department because there's not very many places to refer legal services, especially around eviction. So, that was identified as a very concrete legal need. And, Legal Aid Chicago, as my colleague will share later, has a national reputation and in doing housing work, both in terms of property preservation and subsidized housing renters. But the need is much more vast than what any one agency, including ours, can do. I mean, we're talking about housing issues that are so deep and so broad that um, they just warrant like a lot of creative, thoughtful resource building and collaborative solutions because the need is just so vast. I mean, we heard about these issues from anyone you can think of. In terms of discrimination, we heard for example, about source of income discrimination, and that even when there are laws on the books to be protective, they aren't being enforced. And so people aren't aware of them. This piece around property preservation for small landlords, we heard about, for example, naturally occurring affordable housing in four flats and how many people of color and many low income people live in that housing. And so helping to protect those small landlords is an indirect strategy for helping low income tenants. Homeownership preservation, we heard a lot about the desire to hold on to familial wealth and community wealth by helping people stay in their homes and helping families hold on to their homes. And this links to this broader need around probate and property succession planning and the complex ways in which properties are lost due to forces such as foreclosure and tangled titles, the inability to pay taxes, the ability to do repairs. So people are really yearning for legal and social support, wraparound services, really, as well as like big picture creativity in order to help ameliorate these burdens for people being able to be effectively and safely housed and also own property and hold on to that property in the long term. Next slide, please. So family law is another area with a tremendous need and sub issues and distinct subpopulations needing additional support. the lack of divorce services was repeatedly identified as a chronic unmet need. And it was brought up in the context of many intersecting identities as well. But it's just such a humongous need. Like people would say things like, "Oh, it's divorce. It's family law." I mean, axiomatic. Like everybody knows that that's a crisis need. And so I just think that's an opportunity for law schools and the private bar and like social workers and psychology students and just like a lot of folks to think creatively about how do we stabilize and support families in new ways. DV survivors is a population that our organization and other organizations in our area do a wonderful job serving. And we also heard about just a need for more resources, a need for more holistic services, and the need for intersections of legal issues. For example, family law and immigration were identified as an issue where there is a desire for more cross training and more resources. Same thing with consumer law and domestic violence. One advocate said, in most people's lives, there's only a couple of places, right, where you encounter a lawyer. For some people, it's divorce, it's the buying of a house, and then it's doing probate. And if we're not doing at least those three things for the regular people, then I think we've missed something. I think that's a pretty evocative quote about matching services to what people need in their everyday daily lives. Next slide, please. So we heard about some populations who aren't traditionally served under the legal aid, broadly speaking, the field of legal aid paradigm. And so young fathers, as I mentioned previously, and adult Black men were identified specifically as underserved populations. And child support issues came up often. It was raised by attorneys, it was raised in the context of veterans, it was raised by a group of women in a focus group on the South Side who were concerned about the long lasting and far flung effects on men in their community and on family systems. And resources on those issues are limited. And so that really affords an opportunity for folks in the legal field and more broadly to be responsive to this need. Guardianship and the needs of grandparents, for example, who are in families impacted by incarceration or early death due to COVID or gun violence. And a lot of people we spoke to just didn't know that there were civil legal services to provide assistance with DCFS. So that's an example of an issue where just bridging that knowledge gap is really meaningful. Next slide, please. So public benefits, particularly with regards to SSI and SSDI, is an area where there's a need for additional resources. And something really evocative from COVID is that employment is a crucial part of life and a potentially stabilizing force for those living in poverty. And I think the pandemic really illustrated that anyone is really just one job loss or one illness away from vulnerability. And so workplace issues are very rampant, but there are very few employment law resources in our metropolitan area for low-income people. And consumer issues are often cited but rarely recognized as legal in nature. And issues of credit and debt often co-occur with other legal issues. So that also affords an opportunity for people to bridge that knowledge gap between problems that are being experienced and what are legal issues and what legal recourse is available. Next slide, please. Probate, as I mentioned earlier, is a major unmet need. I mean, this is a very strong theme that emerged in the context of property, but also more broadly, just in terms of estate planning and wills. This is an area where people need and want help and support, and where they feel like it's very difficult to obtain it. There have been some positive changes in our area, like a pilot project that was developed, but the need is still more vast, I think, and much more can be done to be responsive to that need. Immigrants, as I mentioned earlier, are an underserved population, particularly when it comes to immigration law. And legal support for immigrants in other areas of law is also critical. So we also heard about this is another area of intersectionality where people are saying, like immigrants in consumer law, for example, how do those two pieces intersect in complex ways? And how do you find people who are knowledgeable about those? Language access, interpretation, and translation are additional needs that we heard very widely about, and resources are limited for mixed status families and undocumented individuals. And that might be on the purview, for example, of any one organization, but as a field, how can we be responsive to that articulated need in the community? Next slide, please. So just very quickly, serving communities well, we heard about the how of our work, which I think happens very rarely. We don't really hear often about what folks wish we would do as service providers. So we heard a lot about potential collaborative solutions and how multiple stakeholders can work together. Next slide. And structural issues are intertwined. So broader structural issues shape clients' lives and their legal outcomes. People were really verbal about the fact that racial justice is an incredibly powerful overarching theme in our region, and it intersects with so many civil legal issues, and it shapes other issues such as environmental justice, criminal justice, and even structural pieces around technology access, transportation access, and COVID disparities. So all of those kind of big picture structural issues were articulated as things where people need additional support and the thought leadership of legal services and social services providers. Next slide. I've sort of insinuated this in a couple of places, but thinking about compounded vulnerability and intersections, like how can work be nuanced and thoughtful and acknowledge that the more vulnerabilities a person is carrying, the harder it is to navigate those collective issues. So, how can services be provided in a way that acknowledges those multiple vulnerabilities and that is holistic? Next slide. So people are requesting certain types of engagement. They're asking for community legal education, outreach to emergent and underserved client populations, language access and cultural competency, community presence, clarity, communication, and transparency, and building relationships through genuine community engagement, as well as I said before, a response to systemic and structural issues. Next slide, please. So, an obvious conclusion of our work is that civil legal aid is a sorely needed resource. There's a pervasive need and there are limited resources. One person said it's what the community needs, every one of those things. Someone else said, yes, we hear about those issues all the time, everywhere. And another person said there is no substitute for legal aid services, as we've heard from non legal aid orgs. There are certain barriers that direct services agencies just can't tackle without addressing these legal issues. There was another, like a neighborhood level community needs assessment that was done while we were doing our research, and they identified civil legal needs as the number two top issue in their community. And so, a very obvious conclusion of our work is that we need more resources, we need more folks doing this work, and we need more designated funding to support this work, and we also need ways and iterations of doing this work moving forward. Next slide, please. So we all know that there's a tremendous need and our resources are limited. And so our solutions must be collaborative, hopefully, and hopefully multiple stakeholders will be involved. That means we engage in partnership and collaboration and holistic services and seeking funding in new and creative ways and incorporating data and research into our work and engaging with communities. People were very, very clear that they desire access and knowledge of legal aid resources, and they want people to help them better understand legal issues and how systems operate. So my colleague will share more, but community clinics are a wonderful way in which our organization engages directly with the community and affords an opportunity for people to connect. Next slide, please. So this is just a list, and we can actually skip this and come back because I want Barbara to have enough time. But this is a list of when we ask people the question at the end of our interviews of what do you wish you could do with, what do you wish you could do for our area? And these is just a compilation of those ideas. So we'll come back to this, but I want to make sure Barbara gets a chance to share the wonderful work that Legal Aid Chicago is doing on these issues.
Thank you so much, Kulsum. All right, everyone. So you've just heard a few things about what has been identified as a need in the community, but it's not all doom and gloom. There is a lot of hope, and we're actually doing a lot of the work already. So a big part of addressing these needs is sharing with your community and with your organizations that we do the work and we are out there, and connecting with us if you are also doing the work. We need to create a larger, more interconnected web to holistically address these issues. And to that end, let me tell you about the work that we do to help address these things. So as Kate briefly mentioned, Legal Aid Chicago is a private nonprofit that we've been around for over 50 years, and we provide free civil legal services to folks throughout Cook County and seek justice for people living in poverty. And for those who don't know, legal aid is in our name, but legal aid is a general term for free legal advice or help for people who could not otherwise afford an attorney. So there are other groups in Cook County, in Chicago, in Illinois, and in the country that have legal aid in their name, We are not formally affiliated with them. It just means that we provide the same type of services. Excuse me. So as I mentioned, we provide assistance with civil legal needs. This is just a quick breakdown of what that looks like. There are criminal cases where the government charges an individual with breaking a law. And in those cases, you are guaranteed an attorney. That's where the public defender's office comes in. Unfortunately, that same guarantee to representation does not exist for civil cases where an individual or a group brings another individual or a group to court. So that's where we step in. We can provide those services and fill that gap. So there are lots of types of civil legal needs, but the work that we do falls into 7 main categories that I will break down for you now. So first, housing. As Kulsum mentioned, housing is the issue in Cook County, and we do a lot of housing work. We work to protect vulnerable tenants and homeowners. So for low-income tenants, we can assist with cases involving eviction from subsidized housing. If someone is at risk of losing their voucher or has otherwise been denied a voucher, we can assist. And then housing discrimination, again, as was mentioned, with source of income discrimination, that's just one of many types of housing discrimination. We can also assist there. And that's not just for subsidized or public housing. That is for any housing in Cook County. And then for homeowners, we can help with loan modification, home repair fraud issues. And if someone is facing the loss of their home through foreclosure or a tax sale, those are areas that we can assist. We can also assist with preserving that property in their family by doing powers of attorney, transfer on death instruments, and other estate planning documents. Not the full estate planning, but just enough to give them the pillars so that they can move forward. We have a children and families practice group that helps with family law cases and education law cases. So we do personal safety and access to education. So for family law cases, we accept cases that involve domestic violence. And in those matters, we provide holistic family law services, divorce, custody, child support. If there is domestic abuse, we will also handle the restraining orders, orders of protection, however that may look in court. We also represent parents and caregivers who are being investigated by DCFS. We recognize that an indication from DCFS can have serious and lifelong consequences, and we want to help preserve someone's ability to maintain their family. For education cases, we do Title IX cases, which are sexual harassment, abuse, or discrimination cases when the incident happens at school. We also take on cases of special education issues, so IEPs that are not being properly administered or children that are being refused an evaluation. And we do school discipline cases. This is a big one because in Illinois, if you're expelled from school, you can actually be kept out of school for up to 2 years. And we really want to disrupt that school to prison pipeline by helping a child stay in school. So we do those school discipline cases. We know this is a need. Our immigrant and workers' rights practice group is also another large practice group. We're all large. Kate mentioned it. We're over 200 strong, but we do a variety of cases in our immigrant and workers' rights group. We do employment law cases, whether that is employment discrimination, wrongful termination, or wage claims. We do immigration cases, generally when the immigration remedy circles around someone being a survivor or victim of violence or other harm. So we do violence against women visas, U visas, which are for victims of crimes that happen in the United States, T visas, which are reserved for survivors of human trafficking, and we can also assist with asylum matters. I'm sure everyone on this call, since you're in the Chicago area, you know that we have had a massive influx of asylum seekers in Chicago, and we have been on the ground just doing that work with the rest of the community. We also have a project that focuses on migrant workers' rights. We actually go out into the farm and landscape areas throughout the state of Illinois. This is one of the areas where we can work statewide. And we meet with those migrant workers and we talk to them and say, has anyone apprised you of your rights? Do you know what your rights are? Are your rights being protected or violated? And we will pursue claims on their behalf. And then finally, we have a group that works with survivors of human trafficking. This is another one of our statewide programs. So if someone you know is a survivor of trafficking, be it sex trafficking or labor trafficking, we have a team that can help them address all of their holistic needs. Our consumer team focuses on money and debt issues, including things like utilities. Hey, you weren't able to pay your electric bill for a few months and all of a sudden you have a $600 late fee. We might be able to help you work something like that out. Or if you move into an apartment and ComEd is trying to make you pay a bill for the previous tenant, we can help you work that out as well. We do wage garnishments. We can help you explore and or file bankruptcy, issues surrounding car title, payday loans, pretty much any sort of unfair debt collection or consumer fraud. And this group also has what we call our low income tax clinic. It's not actually a clinic, it is a built-in team. It's just what the grant requires it to be called. And this team works with individuals who have an active dispute with the IRS, whether that's something like, hey, you and your previous spouse both filed for the same dependent, or hey, someone else filed a tax return with your social security number. We will actually work with the IRS to figure out what's going on and find a positive solution in your situation. We have a public benefits team, and they just want you to get and keep your public benefits. That's the simplest and most straightforward way to put it. So we can help with denials, overpayments, termination, and other problems for pretty much any public benefit: SNAP, Medicaid, TANF, AABD, Social Security. We also do veterans benefits, and this is another area where we can work statewide. We actually can accept clients from across Illinois if they are a U.S. veteran. This is a very high need group, and we are happy and able to assist with what they may need. This practice group is near and dear to my heart. This is the type of law that I practiced before I transitioned into this type of role that I'm in currently. But we do criminal records relief. So if you have ever been arrested in Cook County, or if you've ever gone to court for a criminal case in Cook County, you have a criminal record. And we can help you clear that up through expungement, which is erasure of certain cases, sealing, which is locking other cases behind a locked wall. You can only see it if you have particular reasons. And then we also do professional license waivers and certificates. So criminal records relief, expungement, sealing, we can handle that as well. Anyone can apply for this service so long as they have a case in Cook County. You do not have to currently live in Cook County. We can actually also take out-of-state clients. They just have different income restrictions. And then our final practice group is our long-term care practice group. It's formerly known as the Ombudsman Project. We advocate for residents in long-term care facilities in suburban Cook and Lake counties. We do not do the city of Chicago. They have their own Ombudsman Project. We do involuntary discharge in Chicago though. But we can investigate complaints and provide information to residents about their rights in a long-term care facility. And as Kulsum mentioned, we have community clinics. These are a wonderful way that people can put a face to the name. They can walk in and just talk to a lawyer on the spot. So we operate 4 community clinics throughout each month. They are at 4 locations. There are no appointments taken. It is on a walk-in basis only. They are all currently located within the city of Chicago, but they are not residency restricted. You do not have to live in the neighborhood where the clinic happens. So we have one in North Lawndale, one in Woodlawn, one in Humboldt/Wicker Park/Ukrainian Village. It's in that weird little gray area, and then one in Austin. And the wonderful thing about these clinics, if you can come talk to us about any civil legal issue, whether or not it's an issue that we take on as like full client cases. For example, the last 3 clinics I've been to, I've talked to several different people about wrongful death lawsuits. We don't do that type of lawsuit or take that type of case, but we can provide advice for how this person can proceed and advocate for themselves throughout that process. So feel free to take a picture of this. The information is also on our website, legalaidchicago.org. It's a great way to access our services or just get brief advice. But then the main way that you would reach us, if you are referring a client or yourself, if you have a legal need, you can call us for an intake, 312-341-1070. The phone lines turn on at 8 o'clock every morning. It is a digital phone queue, so you can either wait on hold or get a call back. You can also schedule that call on our website, again, legalaidchicago.org, or you can visit one of our clinics or help desks. But one other wonderful way that you can assist as a service provider, as someone in this community, is by partnering with us as an agency. So we have an entire community engagement team. I actually oversee them. And we provide lots of different activities. We participate in lots of different activities to engage with the community. And that includes coalitions and task forces, providing trainings on legal issues that we handle. So if you are a service provider and you want a presentation on criminal records relief, that's something that we can help with. We support referral relationships, we conduct traditional outreach activities, and participate in other activities throughout the community just to get our name and the word out there of like, hey, this is who we are, this is what we can do for you. So if you're interested in creating a partnership with us or having us at an event in the community that you know about, you can email us at communityengagement@legalaidchicago.org. Oh, thank you all so much for your attention and time. Now we have a few minutes for questions and answers, but what I will do while we are taking any questions you may have is put back up, and I'm sorry for clicking through so quickly. Unfortunately, it is the best modality in Zoom to do that, but I will leave up this amplifying community ideas slide that Kulsum had mentioned, so feel free to take a picture, peruse it. And again, community engagement at legalaidchicago.org if you would like to partner. So thank you all so much.
So, I guess I'm up. Now, we'll leave that up for a moment or two, and then we'll go to the gallery because I would like to be able to see all of you. But I'm Catherine Martix. I'm the Vice President at League of Women Voters of Chicago, and I'm going to handle questions today. If you raise your hand, we will unmute you. Will unmute you, and you can ask your question. I'm going to go ahead and take this down now, if that's okay. And I just wanted, before we get started, wanted to say that that was wonderful. That was just really exactly what we were looking for. There's so much to know, so much to learn, and it's incredible. And when I heard that you had this community needs assessment, I was excited. Oh my God, this is great. We can look at it. And then I got even more excited when I realized that the title is Moving Forward Together. And I thought, all right, we got to get together. We've got to let everybody know this is going on. And so at this point, I just would like to make sure we all come up with some good ideas, strategize. I know as you were talking, you can't touch one problem without bumping into many others. And I'm, in my mind, I think collaboration might be a way of helping work through some of that. So we have a question. Our first question is coming from Betty Magnus. And if you could introduce yourself and say what organizations you're with. I say it plural because Betty's with more than one.
I'm Betty Magnus. I'm the Executive Vice President of League of Women Voters of Chicago Board. I also work part-time for the Rainbow Push Coalition. I'm a member of other organizations, but my question relates to Rainbow Push. Daily, we get calls for people who need legal aid of some sort. And we are often told that they called and they did not qualify. What is the maximum income level
Sure. So
a
that's
person can have before you will accept the case? Because they keep calling us back and say they wouldn't take us. I made too much money. I'd like to know what that is. So when we refer people, we probably should not be referring them to you if they make too much money.
Mm-hmm.
And we can refer them to a bar association or something else because we do not have lawyers on staff to assist them.
Sure. So I just also want to reassure you, if we turn down someone who is calling for services, we will never just say, I'm sorry, you don't qualify. Good luck to you. We will always provide either brief legal advice or a referral to an organization that may not be bound by the same restrictions that we are. So if someone calls us and they are over income, we will refer them to the Chicago Bar Association, the Justice Entrepreneurs Project, Carpals, whatever organization would be better suited and likely not have those restrictions. So I'm hopeful that the people that you're working with are getting that information. So our general income limit is 150% of the federal poverty level or lower. So unfortunately, that number changes every year and it changes based on the number of people in your household. But currently it's about 23,000, I want to say, just off the top of my head, for a single person household, at about 45,000 for a household of 4. However, there are dozens of exceptions to that. So for example, currently, if you are aged 60 or over, there is no income limit. If you are calling about a domestic violence situation and your legal problem is related to that domestic violence, there is no income limit. If you are a US veteran, there's a significantly higher income limit. If you are living with or impacted by HIV or AIDS, the income limit is something like 500% of the federal poverty level. So, Betty, I hate to give you the lawyer answer if it depends, but it really does depend on that individual's situation and circumstances. And quite frankly, we don't want to put the burden on any of you to have to do that analysis, because our intake team is trained to do that analysis. We will work to see if someone falls into an exception. And again, if they still don't qualify, we will provide them that advice and a referral to someone who will hopefully be able to assist them.
Betty, is that a follow-up question? Yeah,
I did not mean to infer that they just got a point blank answer of no, you make too much money. It was after answering a number of questions and explaining what they were calling about. $23,000 or even 45 is not a lot. But 23,000 for one person, it explains why most of them are turned down.
And unfortunately, that is a number that is set by the federal government. We have no say in that. So if anyone is interested in the history or what that looks like, you can look up the federal poverty level and see how the Department of Health and Human Services and group of bureaucrats and economists come up with that number. So I'm not going to disagree with you, Betty.
Okay. Ami, you're up next. Right.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm sorry to not join you on camera because I don't want to distract you with my kid chaos, but thank you for allowing me to unmute and ask a question. Thank you for the presentation. Kulsum is someone who I've learned from for a very long time in matters relating to language access and immigrants' rights and many other social justice issues. So thank you, Kulsum, as always, for your insights. And I wanted to ask, after hearing with great interest your findings, I was wondering if you learned anything through your study that surprised you. Any, point or two, Kulsum, that surprised you that you wanted us to take a note of. And I should have mentioned, again, I'm Ami, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm with Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and have another Chicago Lawyers Committee colleague on here as well. And we're happy to be here together learning from you.
Thanks, Ami, for your kind words, your work all these years, and also your question. There are many things that surprised me, and I'll only go into a couple of them so that other folks can ask questions if they want to. One was just the demographic shifts. I've done this work for a really long time, and I found it absolutely fascinating. The city of Chicago is now 30% white, 30% Black, 30% Latino. And the number of suburban areas that are majority Latino areas, that was very interesting to me and was educational. And I was also deeply troubled by the out-migration of African Americans, and particularly from neighborhoods that are historical bastions of legal aid clients. So Englewood, West Englewood, Austin, just numerically, the out-migration was very troubling to me. And I really felt that it was an opportunity for very thoughtful, deliberative work on behalf of the entire ecosystem of, how do we rectify some of these long-standing imbalances and disproportionalities in thoughtful and new ways. So that's one. Those are two things that I found very educational. And another one was just the sheer desire for community legal education across the board. One of our interviews, someone said, that's the thing. In many of our interviews, I should say, actually, they said that's what people really need and want is education about the law, education about legal resources, and education about systems. And there was so much clarity in the ask of how people want that, what they need, what they want. I'm hoping in the fall that maybe I'll be able to do another presentation that's really tailored to fellow legal services providers, so that I can share more kind of detailed and granular information that I think will be appropriate for that audience. But that was something I was really struck by. I mean, it's not self-serving because I've spent 2 decades of my life loving and doing that work. It's not like, oh, this was brought by this toothpaste company, and so the research therefore shows that this is the best toothpaste. It was genuine, and I was just like delighted and surprised to hear that theme over and over again, and I can envision how that might look moving forward for us as a field. What might some big collaborative steps look like as a field to meet that articulated need? So those are a couple of examples. I mean, I can share others with you later. Thank you for your question.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alian Anderson, and I am a summer associate at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. So I'm working with AMI as well, which is lovely, of course. And this presentation was so interesting. And I just wanted to ask, like, as a law student, hearing about the increased needs for capacity to like assist and just learning about Legal Aid Chicago's clinics and such, I wanted to ask whether Legal Aid has ever collaborated directly with law schools in hosting walk-in clinics, and if there's any interest or appetite in engaging something like this. And it's something that I am already like wondering, is there a way to engage my law school? And I would just love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. And Kulsum, if you don't mind, I will take that. Our community legal clinics are staffed by Legal Aid Chicago staff, but they are predominantly manned by volunteers, either pro bono attorneys or local law students. So we do currently work with law schools specifically to get volunteers for those legal clinics, but we also have volunteer opportunities outside of the clinics with which we utilize law students, and we have a really robust internship program. So we absolutely recognize the value in partnering with law schools, especially because that's where you find the next generation of lawyers. We need you. Kulsum, Kate, and I, we did not end up here just by chance. We all made the choice, most of us, I think all three of us actually during law school, to do this type of work. So what I'm going to do is actually put in the chat the link directly to our volunteer opportunities page, and you can absolutely inquire through that. And depending on what law school you're with, you may actually already have a direct line. So please feel free to reach out, encourage your classmates to reach out. We will almost always take more volunteers.
So great report. I read it when it came out, like the day or two after it came out, and it's amazing. I have a few questions. One, Kulsum, you talked about language issues and limiting LEP. What languages were, I mean, in addition to Spanish, were most predominantly raised? That's one of my questions. Two, you talk about migration from urban to suburban. I'm guessing predominantly South suburban. Has LAC done anything to expand or think about expanding its clinics to South suburban areas? And then I also wanted to ask, just in terms of topics, if the issue of youth violence came up at all, and working with youth, justice involved youth, their family members, things like that. So
Thank you, Brenda. Those are all excellent questions, and I'll defer to Barbara and Kate to answer your question about our clinics, and then I'll respond to your other two questions.
Thank you.
Hey, do you want to take this, or are you okay with me going for it?
Go for it, Barbara. And if I want to add something, I will. Thanks.
Great, thanks. So we definitely are aware that the need exists in the South suburbs, and we are regularly, and I mean every couple of months, we are regularly looking at our capacity and our ability to open up further clinics. So the reason we aren't in the suburbs yet is kind of a mix of funding, capacity, volunteer opportunities, because as I mentioned, a lot of our clinics are staffed by volunteers. So it is a multi-layered thing. We know the need is there. We do offer a virtual clinic. I didn't include it.
I was just going to ask the same thing. If you were thinking about a virtual clinic.
We already have one, yes.
Okay.
So it also meets once a month. You do need an appointment, and those appointments are held via Zoom. That information is also on our website. So we do know that it doesn't address all of the need. Unfortunately, our whole organization cannot address all of the need, but it
Sure.
is something we're aware of, and we are looking for the opportunity and ability to expand into the south suburbs and the north suburbs, quite frankly, just the suburbs in
Right.
general.
Oh, for sure. Thank you.
Beautiful. The only thing I'd add is that we have a presence at the Markham Courthouse as well as a presence in all the suburban courthouses in terms of operating help desks there. So it's
Mhm.
not the same as a community-based walk-in situation, but it is on site in terms of folks who are needing to be present in court and have a legal case there. So there we do, we do have that, but it's not as frequent as we'd like. And just to echo everything else Barbara said.
Right.
Maybe I
And
can
getting
answer.
that pull too in terms of resources, that we don't have the staffing for the in-person, and trying to figure out whether virtual might kind of bridge that until we're able to get funding. So that's good to know. Thank you.
Insert a quick question. You mentioned volunteers. Do all volunteers have some legal training of some kind, or are there opportunities for anyone to volunteer who?
So our volunteer opportunities change as our projects and needs change. Currently, the majority of our volunteer projects are staffed by legal staff, so attorneys or paralegals. However, there are occasionally volunteer opportunities for non-attorneys. You could be a fair housing testing volunteer, which essentially calls landlords and management companies to find out if your race, your ethnicity, your sex, your gender plays any part in your initial phone call or application. We have finance opportunities through both our low-income tax clinic and we have a financial consulting project. So those do change. I just recommend watching the website. And if you want to get involved, but you can't volunteer, you are more than welcome at any time to attend one of our events or make a donation. That information is also on our website.
Absolutely. Donate to all of us. First Legal Aid Chicago. Does anyone else have a question?
May I just briefly respond to Brenda's other two questions?
Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
so this piece around limited English proficiency and language access is such an instrumental piece because of the changing demographics, right? Like many legal aid organizations, I mean, we're very lucky at Legal Aid Chicago because we have access to language line. We're very thoughtful about language access and limited English proficiency. It's something we've identified in our strategic plan. But in general, in the field, we have not kept abreast with the changing demographic reality of our region. And so there's a huge capacity gap there in terms of providing legal services to folks who are LEP, including folks who are Spanish speaking LEP. So we heard a lot about, yes, there are some resources, but those resources are limited. They need to be deepened. They need to be expanded. Those bridges of access and reciprocity need to be built, and particularly with this eye towards geographic shifts and the suburban landscape, right? So that's a piece of it. It's like deepening the Spanish language piece. I mean, you'd be shocked how few resources there actually are when you go to look in terms of proper, culturally competent, linguistically proficient resources for Spanish speakers across the
And I was just wondering if it went
Yeah.
beyond Spanish, like
Yeah.
Polish.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Or-
gonna answer your second question, but I just wanted to share that point because I
Sure.
think it's one of the most important things, I think, for me, that's a takeaway from the research. That's why I'm emphasizing it, because I think it's a mandate for the field to do things differently as we move forward. And then the second piece, yes, we heard about Polish, we heard about Ukrainian, we heard about new Afghan refugees, we heard about, sort of some of the newer emergent language groups, but Middle Eastern folks and sort of like Arabic language proficiency, when we heard about a lot of different language groups. And I would say like that's an area for deeper research of thinking about what are some of those linguistic shifts, what resources exist currently, and what can be created in the future. So I'm happy to also talk to you. I'll put my email in the chat. We can talk through more of it in detail. But thank you for your question, because it's really a very important theme that emerged from this. And I mean, someone even shared stories of like non-trained court interpreters still providing informal interpretation in legal proceedings. People have no legal training. So it's a huge, huge issue in terms of access to justice in our area. Your second question about youth violence, yes, absolutely, that came up repeatedly. And it also came up in the broader context of interpersonal violence, gun violence, and the connections between those pieces. And so thinking about sort of that relationship between youth, poverty, and violence, we heard a lot about the need for just stabilization and support for youth across the board, and the ways in which youth were deliberately, oh, that maybe that's too harsh of a term. Many youth were harmed in deep ways, I should say, by the pandemic. Mental health issues were exacerbated, violence was exacerbated, and so just a yearning for support for youth. And Barbara mentioned the school to prison pipeline. There's a piece of this that's clearly within our wheelhouse of expungement and sort of the legal relief, and there are bigger pieces there in terms of barriers to stability and opportunity for youth in our area. And so what role can all of us play creatively to help promulgate those resources, to help build support, to help deepen existing programs and create new programs? And there's legal pieces to all of that. So we don't have enough time today, and I'm not wearing that hat, but I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk about the needs assessment and hear more and in more depth about what we heard and what people are asking for, and what I also, as someone with 20 years of experience, feel really strongly about, having dedicated my career to this work. What do I see as some potential points of intervention, prevention, and sincere building forward movement together, like to bring this full circle, right, of moving together, moving forward together. So I would like to just put up, Catherine, briefly the ideas, because to me
Sure.
it's actually about sincerity. It's about sincerity because people shared their time with me, and they shared the experiences of their communities and their own lives with me. And so, to honor that, I want to share the ideas that people are asking for support on, their ideas for what could enrich our metropolitan area and uplift and empower our people collectively, all of our people. And so I encourage people to reflect on those and think about, what role can you play as a League of Women volunteer? What role can you play as a law student? Please email me. I got lots of stuff for you, especially, people who care about culture, who care about language, who care about justice in deep, deep, deep ways, like not surface level, but deep, thoughtful ways, sustainable, long-term ways. I got ideas for you. Like, one of the coolest needs assessments we heard about was multilingual law students who went out. And they went out and they did same language interviews, that didn't cost anybody anything, right? But was a way of inclusion and expansion, building the field in new ways to include new people, to uplift unheard voices. So yeah, so I'd love to talk to you more about all of these things. And please holler at me, send me an email if you want to hear more about the needs assessment. And thanks for sharing in the chat. You put the screenshot, right, of the ideas, Catherine?
No, I don't have it.
Oh, okay.
I put a link to the report, but
Oh, thank you.
Barbara, I think you have the screenshot. And while we're doing that, just so everyone knows, we're recording this. We'll make this available. All of those who signed up will get a link to the recording in an email, and I encourage you to pass it on to others. Okay. Thank you so much. This has been really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Gratitude to Kulsum and to Barbara. They're both so incredibly knowledgeable about our work and such terrific spokespeople for the work that we do and the needs that our community faces. So really grateful to both of them and to all of you for your interest in our work and supporting it. And thanks again to Catherine and Jane for inviting us.
Thank you.